G'day, legends. I hope you are having a fantastic day. And so far, you're having a fantastic week. I've noticed in my own reporting that I do have a bit of a gulf in my knowledge. And one of these is, and I think this is shared across many, about how the Chinese intelligence espionage services actually work. And I've been looking, reading a lot of information, but we have an expert on this here. Nicholas, mate, thank you for joining us. And you've just come out with a book. Can you just give a quick overview of who you are and this book that you've just come out with?
Sure. My name is Nicholas Eftimiades. I have been a China hand all my life, academically in my undergraduate master's. I spent 35 years in the U.S. intelligence community. That includes CIA, State Department, and Defense Intelligence Agency. I have testified on this subject, and I've been I've worked China for my entire life. Testified on this subject multiple times before the U.S. Congress, in U.S. courts, and have basically tracked this. I wrote the baseline work in this area back in the 1990s. And that resulted in testifying multiple times before U.S. Congress and actually the Chinese government declaring me in the People's Daily an enemy of the people. So so I've been following this for the better part of my entire adult life, 40 years just on this subject. I recently put out a book, Chinese Espionage Operations and Tactics. The database I have has over 900 cases of Chinese espionage. And when you have that much data, and they're very in depth on technology theft operations, on covert action or influence operations, on traditional espionage, but when you have that much data, you can put together some extraordinary analysis, which is where I am now. So I retired from the government in 2017, became a full-time professor of Homeland Security at Penn State University. I should say my views don't represent those of Penn State, but that sort of brings me up to current times.
Mate, look, thank you very much, and thanks for being so open with this. And where I want to start is just how much scope does the Chinese intelligence services actually have globally? I hear a lot of people, both online and other sectors, say that there's more human intelligence. They've got a larger scope than all other intelligence services around the world combined. How truthful is that?
Well, that's actually spot on. And the reason is, though, because, and it depends how we're defining the scope and their reach. Okay. Traditional agencies, ASIS, CIA, MI6, whatever it is, they have intelligence operatives overseas, right? People buried in embassies, organizations, things like that. But they're employees of that country, and those specifically try to build out networks of recruited assets. China has what we call a whole of society approach, meaning it's not just their intelligence service, it's not just the Ministry of State Security working towards this. It's the Ministry of Public Security. It's the United Front Work Department. It's the PLA Joint Intelligence Service, working against it. So, and it is actual Chinese citizens, because China passed a law in 2017, and it goes back to 2013 as well in the counter-espionage law, but 2017 passing a national intelligence law requiring Chinese citizens to support intelligence activities. So with this, the law says, and implementing regulations as well, say, with very serious consequences for those who don't. So, what you in fact do is to blackmail is probably not the right words, but you compel your citizenry, wherever they might be, to spy on behalf of the Chinese government. So all of a sudden, where we've had this traditional threat that we were all very prepared for, spy versus spy, and targeting foreign governments and intelligence services and stuff. Now you have China who comes along and literally uses its population to spy in every aspect of a society that they can, primarily economic information. So compared to the rest of us, and depending how you want to, call these assets that they use in place, but they're pretty massive comparatively.
And what sort of theatres are we seeing that these assets are most active in, or states, or how global is the reach of this?
Well, it is global, in traditional espionage. So, I mean, we have traditional espionage, the stealing of secrets, right? We all know what that is. Economic espionage, theft of technology, illegal exports of technology, and then coercion or covert action, working against dissident organizations and such, or recruiting foreign politicians, not necessarily for secrets, but to have them push, the Chinese, the foreign policy towards China's interests, right? So you have them working across the entire board, and you have this everywhere. I mean, you have it in the EU, you have it in Australia, and particularly on the influence front. They've been very active in Australia, and certainly the United States. Dramatic theft of technology, theft of trade secrets, and Taiwan. Even in my database, which now stands at 931 cases, probably of the espionage, which is a smaller segment of that, right? About 200 of the espionage component of that, almost half of them are targeted towards Taiwan. So China is very, very aggressive in trying to steal those military secrets and defense secrets from Taiwan. But globally, the EU has had well over a dozen cases this year. I mean, this used to be something we had once every 3 years. A case came out about espionage with Russia. In months, the EU has had over a dozen cases.
So what I'm sort of getting out of this is the global web, which in layman's terms, say if it is Australian secret intelligence service, that these are guys who are intelligence officers and that they are conducting espionage, where it's not incredibly uncommon of this happening, but not to the same extent that if there is a citizen in another country, say an Australian citizen, just goes to another state to be recruited by this, whereas the Chinese that have citizens or Chinese citizens in other states, that there is a law that you're saying could be then used for these people to relay information if needed. So that web just creates, of course, China has a massive population and massive diaspora. So the actual web of information going out is unbelievable. And then how does that information get then co-located back in? Because collecting information is one thing, actually breaking that down, fusing it and being able to use it.
Right. So interesting question. First, also keep in mind, Australia uses ACES, right? Mm-hmm. They don't use other government agencies. They don't use, universities to do that. They don't use research institutions. They don't use any of that. In China, I always tell CIA friends, you guys don't know about Chinese espionage. Why do you tell Nick MSSs? We know about the MS. Yeah, you know about the MSS. Those aren't the ones primarily conducting espionage. I mean, that's one specific target, and they target, either CIA or government official. But that's not, the primary espionage that goes on, certainly in the United States. I mean, it's economic espionage, it's technology, and very little of that is actually done by the MSS. I mean, they do a cyber campaign. All this is exclusive of cyber. But so it's broad and integrated in their entire society. That's why we call this a whole of society approach to conducting intelligence. Someone overseas, to answer your question, who may have to, who may be conducting theft of technology or some other aspect of intelligence activity that they want done. They have a set of communications capabilities that they use. If it's low level like that, they often just use WeChat. It's an encrypted platform. It's not subject to foreign governments responding with warrants, for information. That's not going to happen. So first, we see a variety of tradecraft. Actually, you can point to a variety of tradecraft per industry. I have 127 cases on targeting aerospace technologies, 170 or so on information technologies, semiconductors and such. And you can see variances in the tradecraft that they use in each one of those industries. The use of people, use of emails, use of encrypted emails. We had a very interesting case by a guy named Zhang in Schenectady, New York, working for General Electric. And this is a typical thing. He was doing this for business purposes for state-owned enterprises in China. And what he did was take the data he stole from General Electric on turbofan engines and embedded it inside a photo. Embedded it inside a photo of a sunset, and then he emailed the sunset photo to his to one of his relatives in China, and in so doing, actually moved out the General Electric information that way. So, because it's not structured like an MSS operation necessarily, you get this wide variety of tradecraft and a wide variety of motivations that come along with doing that. MSS is comparatively easier to figure out. It's a little more difficult when you have this wide range of tradecraft that's applied it.
That wide range of tradecraft, that is very interesting to me, of this whole sort of net that is being thrown out. And this primarily, I'm guessing, is under human intelligence, like humans. And what is this mainly relying on? What is backing this? Is it coercion? Is it patriotism for China? Is it financial motivation, or can it be a mixture of all these? Like, what is actually motivating behind the scenes to collect and send information?
Right. So it's interesting. Traditionally, English-speaking countries that have intelligence services use the acronym MICE in understanding motivations for other countries conducting espionage. Money, ego, coercion, and money, ideology, coercion, ego. Okay, MICE is the acronym that traditionally counterintelligence services relied on. So as I had experts reviewing some online videos that I do, I have online training courses on this, and I throw it out to 10, 15 counterintelligence experts first and ask them to go through it and beat it all up. So one of the experts came back to me and said, "Nick, you should include the acronym MICE into this." And my immediate response was, well, MICE isn't relevant because, there's so much more. And then I thought to the significance of that. Wait a minute, MICE is not relevant here because China has so many other different motivational factors they use. And I came up with the acronym BEWARE, which is business interests. Sorry, give me a moment, Matt. I'm just first.
No worries. No, we should that it's very early morning where you are at the moment.
Yeah, business interest, emotional attachments, wealth, academic advancement, repression, and I forgot my last E. So, sorry. And I said emotional bonds, right? Business interest.
Emotional attachment, maybe.
Yeah, but emotional attachment. But I thought I already said that. Anyway, as I'm talking about,
we get the idea.
I'll figure it out. So you find in, for example, the economic espionage cases, of which there are hundreds, right? So they're not done for money, like as in, give me $100,000, I'll give you the secrets, the trade secrets. Never done as a deal like that. It's always done with business. Take that back to China, give me a job, or I'll set up a competing business, or we'll go work for competing business. And the difference there is that if someone's doing, using for just getting money or wealth out of it, right? Then there's a certain tradecraft that comes along with that. You look for financial transfers and things like that. You look for emails that have to be sent back and forth. If you are setting up a business in China, well, that involves a lot more. That involves multiple trips to China. That involves frequently your relatives opening up bank accounts to China. That involves paperwork that you've got to do with the Chinese government. And all these, for investigators, are trails. They leave a trail of communications and a trail of paperwork. So if you're an insider threat specialist and you're looking at an economic espionage case, the first thing you should go do is look at the person's contacts in China, how they've been communicating with them, and their establishment of business interests in China, right? We have emotional attachments. So we've seen cases where in stealing of technology from laboratories, it's done on an emotional basis, meaning that a professor will call someone, and in China has a Confucian system of education, right? So the professor calls someone and says, listen, we'd appreciate if you could get this kind of information. Oh, certainly, professor, I'll do that. And the person winds up in a research institute in the US or Australia, or in a university, winds up stealing that that information, that technology, simply based on the emotional emotional attachment. You see the same thing in MSS operations. MSS operations often go back to, well, I knew this guy in high school in China, and the guy in high school in China reaches out and says, ethno-nationalism was the last E. We'll get to that. But it reaches out, and it's an emotional attachment. We've known each other for years, this and that. We want you to help with 1, 2, 3. Okay, so emotional attachment. Wealth. Taking a look at the technology transfer, the illegal shipments of technology, all that's done for cash. I mean, as distinguished from economic espionage, if you're just talking about the illegal export of technology, most times it's a cash deal. And frequently, the person stealing the technology is no affiliation with an intelligence service or so. They don't even know, and I've seen this several times, they don't even know the technology that they're taking. Right? They're asking for it. They're an agent who comes to, agent being recruited by either China's intelligence services or state or an enterprise, coming to the U.S. and trying to arrange for purchase of of technology such as chips, semiconductor chips. Right? And they're just doing it on a cash deal. And you can start to see then fake websites set up. You can start to see financial transactions that go through cover companies and things like that. Again, a different set of tradecraft, a different motivation. So we see different ways of affecting that on the ground, right? Different tradecraft involved. Academic advancement. As a fundamentally Confucian-based humanistic society like China, scholarship stands very, very, highly prized. So it's why they put 175,000 students in Australia and the UK and 300,000 students in the United States. I mean, why do you go do that? Because they want their kids at the best schools possible. And, because coming back to China with academic degrees like that puts you a notch above everybody else. I mean, if you're going to be a professor in China, you're going to get treated well, period. Your housing is paid for, you get a lot of respect from society, respect from your students. So academic advancement is a key thing that's prized in China. And that's why you see scholars who steal research or technology, literally negotiating academic positions based on this stolen technology back in China. And I've seen universities say, well, we'll give you yes, we'd love to have you. Bring that information. We'll give you an assistant professor. And the person responding back, no, I want to be an associate professor. I think, and that person actually shopping, hey, I stole this. I can bring this back from the US. It'll advance us tremendously. I can do X number of papers based off of this. What I'm asking for is an associate professorship and such. So academic advancement in many of those, in all the cases that we see relative to universities, not all, some of them are emotionally based, but in most of those cases, they do it for academic advancement back in China. The R in beware, repression. Repression, let's call it that coercion, that reaching out. Surprisingly, in very few cases, and in fact, I could say it's pretty well. I mean, there are some other examples, and in China, of course, there's a subtlety that you have to appreciate too. People say, "Oh, I think you should do this, otherwise it could be big trouble." That's that's a threat in China coming from the state. But even with those things included, you get something like 1, 2, 3% of the cases that are actually targeted against, that go back to repression as being the fundamental motivation why. And almost exclusively, those are targeted towards diaspora overseas. The last E, ethno-nationalism. We do have, and by the way, out of the 900 some odd number of cases that I have, I was able to go through and get about 560, 70, 80 cases that actually track back to these motivations, that you can see these motivations in. So that's a fair data pool you're working with now. We're working like close to 600 cases that you can slice and dice and say, look at all the motivations in this case and associate that to the tradecraft and associate that to the target. Okay, so it's there are of course flaws in how you approach this. So well, how many people have two motivations? Probably a lot. How many people say, I'm doing this for Mother China, which I've read a lot. Would you be doing it for Mother China if you weren't getting paid $175,000? So so there are questions within it. But again, the way you kind of eliminate those questions is to have such a massive data pool, to work with, so you can see the general trends in what in motivational factors. But the last one, ethno-nationalism, is loyalty to China. I'll say China as opposed to the CCP. Now the CCP has done, and this regime, unlike all others, has done a far better job of getting people to support it, do this for the CCP. And the CCP pushes that line, right? And so you get a lot of people responding. We all have what we call little pinks overseas, right? Little pinks who display and do sometimes subversive acts and stuff, and do openly supporting the CCP, right? Openly supporting China and the CCP because it helps them move up in the system in China. It helps their prestige. It helps them if they're looking for business cases. I've seen several espionage, or I should say covert influence cases, where the people are writing back, to China and saying, to their contacts in China, saying, look, you can look at my history and see what I've done here. I have done this, and gaining recognition and gaining, favorable trade deals and money and things like that within the CCP. Okay, so that last ethno-nationalism is a belief in China, is I'll do this for China, I'll do it for the CCP.
And how strong is that compared to the other parts of Beware? How strong is that ethno-nationalism as far as I'm not just doing this for money, I'm not doing it because I'm coerced, I'm not doing it for academia, that I'm doing it because I want to see the betterment and further pushing of China?
Yeah, I would say there's a pretty strong sentiment. There's a big difference between ethnic Chinese who were born in the United States or who immigrated to the United States and have been here for, X number of years. The ones who are born here obviously have a loyalty to the U.S. The ones who have ties and connections back at home, loyalties are split. So you do see that, and I would say it's a and China again, makes it a financial thing. Loyal to the CCP, do good to the for the CCP, and you'll be rewarded. I mean, that's kind of the type of system that China sets up. So how much people really believe it and how much they just do it because they want the rewards from it? I mean, you join the CCP in China because you don't become a major person in business unless you have that affiliation. It's contacts, it's networking, it's approval for projects that you want to do. It's all that's wrapped up within the CCP membership. You're the leader part of society if you do that. Historically, that hasn't worked that much, but because Xi Jinping has been able to deliver on the economy, and it's not even just Xi Jinping, Hu Jintao prior to him, because the Chinese government is delivering on the economy, it's had a big push now. There's a push for people getting in the CCP. I want to get my part of that.
And how successful, how effective are these operations, this massive web of human intelligence that is then put out across the globe, fusing this together, giving an idea about it, whether it be from a tradecraft secret to intellectual property to whatever. How successful and effective are the Chinese at actually gathering this information?
So effective, I mean, they get it done, but they get it done not because they're particularly good, but and not even because of the tradecraft that they employ. They get it done because of the massive numbers that they have. And I'll give you an example. The FBI has always said publicly that they get about 2 cases a day dealing with China and dealing with the economic espionage, blah blah blah, all that stuff. So 2 cases a day times 365 days a year, 730 cases a year. Every one of those takes months to resolve, months or long. So we, who have probably the largest intelligence apparatus, I mean, like real official government agency intelligence apparatus in the world, or we probably go head to head with China on that, but we can't handle it. There's no way our folks can handle that type of onslaught of numbers of cases. So it's not whether they're good or not. It's the fact that, as we used to say, it's a grain of sands theory, meaning in the old days, if we knew the Russians, we knew the Soviets, if they wanted to steal a bucket of sand from the beach, they would bring a submarine in at night. A bunch of commandos would slide out of the submarine. They would swim into shore. They would set up a perimeter. They'd get a bucket of sand and they'd turn around. They'd go back to the sub and slip in under the waves unnoticed. That would be a Russian technique. China would send 10,000 bathers the next day, and they'd all come back with a little bit of sand, and they'd have multiple buckets. And that's the difference. And the West is not set up. Australia, US, Canada, pick a place, is not set up for its defense of the entire economy and for its defense of society, right? We're not set up to defend Oregon State if China's penetrating the state level apparatus and trying to get them to do policy actions against federal government action, which they are trying to do. Right? We're not set up, our federal system is not set up to go protect the state like that. So this is the problem. The problem is that it's a whole of society approach, and the West is just not set up to be able to respond to that effectively.
So yes, individually, our counter-espionage, I guess, is very good, but it's just the amount of onslaught of this that we will just never keep up with all these cases, as you say. I think that grain of sand, instead of going and getting a bucket and taking it back, everyone just gets one grain and you eventually fill it. You just create this massive backlog in our services trying to do this, and just that quantity is a quality of its own. And I guess this is part of the tactic on these intelligence operations, is that they're fully aware of, well, we can just completely drown them in paperwork, and then we can operate in silence, basically, behind this.
Right. It's just China's way of doing things. Actually, the NSS has a term, chindiyu, which is bottom sinking fish, okay, or fish on the bottom of the ocean, where you can put a person in, lay at the bottom of the ocean, and observe everything that's happening. I mean, all the time. And that tends to be the approach towards it. Plus, the other component of this is that the U.S. legal structure and foreign government legal structure is usually not set up to protect industry, right? It's not set up to protect Australia or America. It's designed to protect government secrets. That's what the design of those agencies are, to penetrate foreign governments and to protect your own government secrets. It's not designed to protect some person coming out with an innovative approach and developing a widget that's going to change the world. It's not designed to protect that. So many countries don't even have the law in place to do that yet. And even the US law is extremely weak in a lot of areas.
You've mentioned a few times where there is this sort of intelligence operation web, and then the MSS sit, I guess, off to the side of this. Can you just explain that level of dislocation of using basically citizens for just massive web espionage, even if they are unaware that they are actually involved in it? And then where you have these actual intelligence agents and officers. Can you explain that difference? Like, who is then an MSS operative and who is collecting, I guess, information because they work in a
Right.
university?
So you have certain categories of that I've been able to break down those cases into groups, right? The Ministry of State Security under the State Council, a bona fide agency of the Chinese government. Same way the Ministry of Public Security, you have them usually often going after the diaspora overseas, the 100 and plus police stations that China set up globally were all done by elements of the courts and the Ministry of Public Security, right? So the reporting channels, the work against diaspora were something different. You have state-owned enterprises, 300,000 of them in China, approximately, and some with hundreds of thousands of employees. So you have them doing an actual collection campaign. In fact, in Australia, when individuals were arrested for, let's say, espionage in Parliament, for some of the staff that were supporting Parliament, and they had arrests for that. Within a day or so, 2 days, the China Petrochemical Industry Corporation, I guess it is, sent out a note telling its political committees within the branches of the company worldwide to burn down all the information that they had, to not wear China pins, to keep a low profile. And if you couldn't destroy the information on everything you were working on, bring it to the embassy for secure holding. So Australia hit a target internally, and it resulted in a state-owned enterprise going out, particularly in Southeast Asia, saying, hey, curb your activities that you have ongoing and keep a low profile. Don't admit to anyone that there's a political committee inside the company, where you are. Amazing that we can see that cause and effect thing happening. So you have it deeply embedded in state-owned enterprises, all of which have political committees, that basically run or keep abreast of the organization. So the CCP has control of those. You have it in private companies. Most of the economic espionage cases we see are with private companies. They're the ones doing the lion's share of the work of human on-the-ground espionage. Some cases they get support by the MSS. Other cases they get support by the CCP. By provincial level officials and higher. So there's a lot involved that the MSS probably just knows about MSS operations. They don't know about. I have 60-something cases where I've documented universities engaging in theft of foreign technology. So it's does the MSS know that university is doing it? Probably not. But and unlike a place like Australia where things are centralized, or or the United States or any of the Western world, where again you would tend to know if something like that was going on, but a university wouldn't just take it on its own to go conduct economic espionage or theft of technology. China's a little different, so less of a command structure in that. I mean, certainly a command structure within their own government agencies. That's very well developed, but far less to a degree for their entire whole of society approach.
So then who actually co-locates this information? So if a university professor in Australia, say, just for an example, goes, yep, this has come across my desk, this would be interesting to China, I'm looking to sell it or to send it, or however, how do they then exploit this information? Because
Right. Well,
it makes it a lot more simple if you're a intelligence operator in ASIS and you have a chain of command, you send it to this bloke, it goes up the chain and it gets used and co-located how it needs to. How does that then structure work when you have just so many people? It seems like the handlers would need to be so dispersed as well.
Right. Well, you got to think about it in a different sense here. That information is not centralized, right? So if you're in an MSS chain, the information is centralized, and it's centralized not within the MSS, but within the CCP, right? Within the party. So a MSS branch office at a provincial level will collect information and they'll turn around and pass it to the Political Legal Leading Commission representation within that province, right? And and I'm assuming the information goes up to Beijing as well. But most of that is done at provincial levels. So we have various provinces centralizing information within them, and then that top apparatus, the MSS, making sure that all the provinces are aware of information that they have to be. And an example would be Dixon Yo. Dixon Yo, who out of Singapore was arrested for covert action, or basically trying espionage in the United States. Was arrested, a year in jail, sent him back to Singapore. When he talked about his experiences with the MSS, and he was a recruited asset by the MSS, by Shanghai, they brought him to several different provinces on the multiple trips he made to China, where he would get debriefings by different MSS units. And he said, I got tasking from those, from all the different provinces, and it was all the exact same tasking. So what that kind of shows us is a centralized tasking structure, right, going out to those branch offices, and the MSS coordinating internally to make sure that he had, could be responsive to in collecting, targeting and collecting other offices, collecting other information for those offices. But all turned out to be the same information. So for the MSS, we see the chain. Or same thing with the Ministry of Public Security. If you collect information, it's going to the local Political Legal Leading Commission, right? And some of that will get passed back up through your chain of command to Beijing, and the Political Legal Leading Commission will also pass that information up for the policy ranks in China. So again, for the policy ranks in the CCP. So CCP dominated and controlled. For the legal, I should say the legal structure, the structure of intelligence within China. For the state-owned enterprises, free for all. It's, it could stay local, it could get briefed to other areas in the province, it can get traded, sold, and the same thing for companies. China does set up some things to try and assist. 400 and something last count of science and technology trading posts, let's call them, or zones within provinces and such, where they will help you identify a specific type of technology that you need for your business. Now those, they typically get information from within the structure that, so and so company has this type of technology, or state-owned enterprises, we can make that business to business connection. So a lot of attempts to move that information laterally, through technology, through business contact, sponsored by the Chinese government. And then you have a political channel for the types of information collected by the NPS, MSS, and PLA.
And how do then the professional agents of the MSS work?
You mean the case officers?
Yeah, like your case officers, the ones who have done years and years of training, then whether this is recruiting on the ground or carrying out then operations themselves, whether it be intelligence operations of blackmail, intelligence operations of coercion against or to compromise targets. How does that then work? Or more of that like traditional agent professional
so
level?
Like traditional agent handling. The MSS works primarily locally inside China, broken up by provinces. There are, my last count, 29 MSS offices, okay, that I was able to identify. So you have their work locally, which then then targeting foreigners inside China. In fact, they have lists of informants. They have, and they say, in our annual reporting, we went to X number of hotels catering to foreigners. This hotel, we briefed them, and that's a lot of what they're doing, are briefing businesses that come in contact with foreigners, briefing hotels, briefing services bureaus that come in contact with foreigners, and having them report, training them to report, so that information is collected locally, right? And they have lists of informants, different types of informants that they actually put down. I think there are 5 or so different types of informants that they actually recruit, and they provide annual statistics on that. So we see them working aggressively against, and they make a distinction between Taiwan and foreigners inside China. They're not the only ones collecting inside China, right? The Ministry of Public Security, far greater in numbers than the MSS, is also doing the exact same thing, doing that type of collection inside China and against different targets. Anything foreigners or Taiwan related, they pass to the MSS. But everything else, everything, the collection of data against Chinese people, churches, things like that, is all done by the Ministry of Public Security inside China. And again, that gets passed over to the political legal leading commission entity, right? So they're sucking in all that information, centralizing that information within the province. The party committees that exist in state-owned enterprises and many companies, right? That information is also, and it's an aggressive surveillance system, even at neighborhoods, at state levels, right? At provincial levels. Every 10-block square radius has a surveillance program, basically, that's managed. All that information gets passed over to the committee. Okay, so they're the central points, the powerhouses of tasking and receiving information within the China's vast intelligence apparatus. Same thing for the MSS overseas, right? So the MSS overseas is being managed by a specific province. Prior to 2016, I wrote about this in 1994. You used to be able to see very distinct patterns of MSS provincial level offices to certain countries overseas. So you could actually bin them that way. Not anymore. They seem to have broken with that. So you have, and I've done this crosswalk of a dozen different, provincial level offices reaching out to various different countries, having assets in various different countries. So they don't have that much of a structured breakdown as they used to. So, this is, and obviously the intelligence operations run by the MSS domestically are going to be different from the way they run it with foreigners. You don't find, even within the MSS, you find great variances in tradecraft, which leads you to conclude, okay, how are they being trained? Where's the oversight on this? Because I have emails where just people are saying, okay, let's not use the term MSS. And this is an open email that's saying, use the term banana, something like bananas or something. So, and then the very next email will be, okay, if you want bananas to work on 1, 2, 3, then you have to, guys, you're in the same email chain. What are you doing? An absurdity in as far as espionage tradecraft goes. And then you have other cases, again, run by the MSS in the United States and such, where they're servicing dead drops, doing things, quasi-professionally as espionage goes. So great variance within that. There's a lot of pressure to produce internally, and it's hard to say because I can't say it over all provinces, right? But some of the provinces where I've gotten insight to, there's a lot of political pressure to push for collection. So these guys are just, pulling fast, going back and forth and trying to collect and trying to get operations going. And I think that leads to shortcuts a lot.
And it is, because I know a lot of people in Australia that there is concern that we have foreign leaders, politicians who have been to some level compromised by Chinese intelligence and security services. Is that something that these agencies would operate in, or is it more collection, human intelligence, rather than coercion through being compromised, such as a lot of people will point to? Now, just take this on face value, as far as people say that the Epstein Island thing was a foreign intelligence service operation run to compromise a number of elites around the world. Now, whether it was or wasn't, it's not what we're debating, but you could see how if that was an operation, it would compromise a number of individuals, of course, through sexual and blackmail. There is a lot of concern that there are a number of politicians, and I'm not meaning just through maybe sexual blackmail, but through other channels, have been compromised that may then be either sending back information or working in the interests of the state. Is that something that we could see in a state like Australia?
Yes. In fact, you do see it in Australia. The number of cases that you guys have come out is rarely for, in fact, I don't even think I know one for, trying to think, a couple bordered on espionage, as in taking government secrets. The vast majority of what you see out of Australia, though, is covertly influencing politicians, right? Paying politicians and stuff. And China doesn't work so much in the coercion world, right? Everyone kind of focuses on that. But these are the ones typically done by the Ministry of State Security or the United Front Work Department, right? Focusing on that. In fact, I think you have one recently with a Buddhist temple with ties back to the Ministry of Public Security. The woman who was
what happened there?
If I remember correctly, she was doing surveillance or collecting against a Buddhist temple in Australia, and when she was arrested, her husband, I guess it was, is a senior provincial level official within the Ministry of Public Security. Right. Australia doesn't open up too much about these things, but that's the current state of the case, and that was in 2025. That was actually probably a couple of months ago. So you get a lot of that type of activity in Australia, particularly attempts at political, let's say, subversion as opposed to coercion. So jaunts to China, bringing people over, whining and dining them, big money thrown at them, donations to areas within their districts, to hospitals and things like that, all with the objective of building what they say friends. I mean, the Chinese will actually use that term. The Ministry of State Security actually uses that term, friends, to developing friends in China, for China overseas. So that's the type of subversion, and most often, the politician is oblivious, or the incentives are so good, even for real reasons. No, my district there is going to benefit tremendously from this $100,000 investment in the hospital. So even for the right reasons, they build relationships with China, but China's ideas are centralized that way. Everything should not be about trade or about money. And a few years ago, Australia, during COVID especially, stood up amongst all nations, proving no, things are about democracy, about our political future, and not just about caving into China for a trade relationship. So, Australia took that line for a while, for a few years, and was actually showed leadership in the world that was pretty impressive. Right.
I think a lot of Australians may have had a very different opinion at the time about how handling of the situation during the spicy flu. But it is good to hear that the leadership did stand up and go, look, we are trying to push back against if there is outside influence. But how much, as an American, as an Australian, as Westerners speaking, how concerned are you about the amount of information being collected, the amount of information being used? And then, of course, what we see is then China's manufacturing, their industry, their technology over the past years absolutely skyrocketing. How concerned does this make you for competition in the global order?
Well, for me personally, obviously, it's an area of concern. Most people, I think, are pretty oblivious to it. So, for example, China has collected, we estimate, data on PII, personally identifiable information, on 85% of Americans. It's why the issue of TikTok is such a lightning rod within the United States, because through that, and if you take a look at the terms of service, they get everything from your location to your interests to your contacts, your connections. So all that, your communications, all that is done through TikTok. So, and by law, TikTok is obligated, as an element of ByteDance, they're obligated to give that to the Chinese government by law. So, the pervasiveness of that intelligence apparatus within society, it'd be one thing if Australia had TikTok and Australia had it in the United States. Who cares? It's an ally. It's a belief. We both have the same principles, the same beliefs, freedom and democracy. Sometimes different ways of implementing it, of course, but we both have the same foundation in our belief in a free society. China's done nothing but develop warships. China is aggressively, moving out militarily. China has declared the entire South China Sea as part of China. So, I mean, you can see the concerns, the deep penetration of society, the broad penetration of society, not only deep, but broad, of the political apparatus as well, in a country that has been moving to a wartime footing, at least as far as its military-industrial complex is concerned. Largest navy in the world at this point. So, it's not like it's your best friend doing this. It's not like it's someone who has the fundamental beliefs that you as a society do. And where our politicians fail is that they often just see it as a trade relationship. Well, they're our biggest trading partner. We have to protect that trade relationship. Yeah, at the expense of potentially losing your democracy. So tough choices.
Well, you say this at the expense of losing a democracy, the trade relationships, and how there's a rising for global power at the moment. Where do you see these operations leading China within the next 10 years, or the end game, the long game? Because we do know in a state like China, strategic patience, they add to absolutely everything. And you can do this in a structure like that. You can be a lot more strategically patient than you can when you have a complete upheaval of your system every 4 years through voting. I'm not saying that therefore we throw that away. I'm just saying that it's very difficult for us to plan 10, 50 years into the future. Where do you see this leading in 10 years? What are they seeing as, we collect this information, we do this, we infiltrate into politics, into academia? Where does this thing go?
I get it. It goes to, it goes to China winning. Unfortunately, that's the direction it goes. We have, America's policy towards China for so many years, 30 years, was based on ignorance, arrogance, and greed. Right? Ignorance because they really didn't understand the CCP and what they were up to and their hold on power. Arrogance because in the U.S. they tend to think that everybody really wants to be a freedom-loving American inside, right? And in China, the minute they start making money, oh, don't you worry about it, Nick. I used to hear this from members of Congress all the time. They're going to change. They're going to love, we've seen studies by Harvard that the minute they get a certain GDP, they all start demanding political freedom. Guess what? It's gone quite the other way, right? And the fact of the matter is that whether it's Australia, the UK, US or something, greed, the desire to make money has driven a lot of that relationship. So you're fighting against considerable factors if you want to change the nature of the relationship. China has that benefit. And as you point out, they also have strategic, patience. So Donald Trump's a pain. Well, Donald Trump can only be a pain for another 3 years. And you know what? That last year, we'll put everything we have into supporting another type of candidate with a more benign view on China. In fact, China put out a study in 2019. A think tank put out a study that they did with Tsinghua University for their customer, the United Front Work Department. And what that paper did, what that document did, was rate the U.S. governors from 1 to 50 on their friendliness towards China, and specifically says in it we should start targeting at a lower level as the federal government becomes hard on us. So, federal government's hardened, so you now start moving towards the state and local governments to kind of go around the federal government. And strategic long-term patience. Okay, so you're wise to us on the federal level. You're putting up blocks and defenses and Congresses. We'll go to the state level and we'll go to businesses. And we've seen this actually quite publicly. China writing to hundreds of U.S. businesses out of the embassy, their liaison relationships, writing and saying, you need to oppose this legislation in Congress because nobody makes money. You're not going to make money in China if this happens. So literally lobbying with major corporations and, to overturn U.S. policies or to inhibit U.S. policies. So if they keep that up, we'd have to fundamentally reset the nature of our relationship with China, which is not easy to do. And the same goes for Australia.
And you said in that they are winning just with the amount and the scope of the intelligence, the scope of influence. Do you see, therefore, then significantly more influence into our societies?
Yeah, certainly. We have 283 sister city relationships with China. Every one of those documents that's signed for sister city relationships prohibits the U.S. city from flying the flag of Taiwan anywhere in an official capacity. So just influence stuff like that in every sector you look at happens. I've been in the room with members of Congress when a U.S. company will come in, and thank goodness they're a little more patriotic about it. Will say, "Look, sir, I'm going to tell you this because China has told me I have to say, this is what I have to push in Congress. They want this legislation passed because of 1, 2, 3 issues. And if you do, we'll donate this amount to your campaign." I mean, that's as dirty as it gets, but at least a member of Congress I was with says, "Thanks. I appreciate you letting me know, we're obviously not going to do that." That just hardened the resolve in that case. But, this is relentless at the federal level, at the state level, at city level. So massive, massive approach. And forget about if you quadruple the size of the FBI, it's still not enough. They don't have the capabilities, they don't have the jurisdiction, they don't have the law to go down to city levels and say, "Wait, don't sign that document," because they want you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that just pushes you more towards their views. It's a manipulation. You remember a few years ago, when the manager of the Houston Rockets said, "Stand with Hong Kong, stand with freedom," and wrote that in a tweet. China canceled the National Basketball Association, the NBA's work inside China, their games inside China, a $6 billion contract. China canceled it and said, "Apologize." And so that's the risk that you run. They control you. I mean, that just got turned back on because basketball is very popular in China. But imagine that they cancel a $6 billion contract over a tweet. I mean, so it's formidable, it's relentless, it's broad ranging, and we are not, as open free societies, adapted to contend with this.
There's obviously a massive political divide happening in the US. It's been boiling away, bubbling away for a number of years. It got the turbo boost during then the virus. And then, of course, we see today what's happening in the last weeks and months. And I think with the assassination of Mr. Charlie Kirk, it's sped this up again. I've often thought that if I was an intelligence agent, what I'd be looking to do is exploit this divide. I wouldn't care if I was pushing on the left and the right, but what I'd be focusing on doing is pitting these against each other. Are we seeing, and not just China here, but intelligence overall, are we seeing foreign intelligence agencies pushing and exploiting on these divides? Because I've often said, all I'd do is I'd push support into the left and the right, because pitting them at each other, that the US will not be conquered, but it could have an internal revolt. Are we seeing that from any intelligence services?
We've seen 3 that aggressively are acting like that. We've seen Iran, and that was through cyber activities, trying to manipulate the last elections. We've seen Russia, which has regularly been doing this, since 2017, again, 2016, again through cyber. And what we don't know, by the way, is how effective those are. Right? Those types of operations. We have seen China on multiple occasions working to get to stir up dissent within the United States. So an example of a case that happened out of Baltimore just a couple of years ago, and where this guy got, a journalist, if you want to call him that, he works sort of odd jobs in media production, things like that, had a company contact him from China to do a documentary in the United States on racism in the United States. And one of the things that he had agreed to do, and the money that they were paying him, and this is out of Baltimore, Maryland, was in Washington, hold a protest. So, on racism. And the guy said, these are actually things I believe in. I didn't know the company, but Mandiant, a U.S. firm that focuses on cybersecurity, was able to trace that relationship with that company, working on behalf of the United Front Work Department, right, to the company, and the company to this guy. And what he was doing was hosting basically what appeared like loud protests, against racism in the United States. Took pictures. He said those were only supposed to be stock photos for the documentary. And he sent them back to China, and they were all over the media. And we tracked thousands and thousands of placements in foreign media sources showing the great racism and the fighting going internally in the United States. We've seen them supporting through nonprofits Black Lives Matter. We see lots of individuals now, forgetting China for a minute, you see lots of, from George Soros to other billionaire financiers, supporting organizations that sow social distrust, social problems in the United States. So we see it happening all the time. We see it happening from billionaires. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was just received a note, a memo. In fact, I posted that from Congress saying, you know what, we have you giving to X number of organizations, all of which support the military-industrial complex in China. What are you doing? So we see this all the time. We see a lot of people monkeying around with U.S. elections. Canada, within the last few months, Canada worked with a dozen U.S. states to try and overthrow the tariffs, to try and counter the tariffs that the United States put into place, that the federal government put into place. Now those same states have taken this issue to the Supreme Court, whether the U.S. in fact actually has. But Canada cut monetary deals with each one of the states to say, hey, look, can you go against the U.S., go against the federal government on this tariffs? It's hurting our trade with each one of you. Those states that border Canada. I get it. Someone could look at that and say, well, wait a minute, isn't that foreign interference within the U.S. policy process? And you get it all the time. We get it all the time. We get it from allies. We get it from enemies. We see a fair amount of it from China, specifically to sow political discontent within the United States.
And of course, you see a huge amount of intelligence, foreign influence, of course. I think the most spoken about one at the moment is from Israel. Then, of course, like we see, the big story at the moment is hundreds of conservative Instagrammers to YouTubers to whoever being flown across to Israel, being paid, being put up to then release content as they see fit. We saw, I'm sure you're aware of, the 50 states won Israel, where a representative of all 50 states went to plant a tree in Israel. And would you also call this on the same level of foreign interference and influence?
Well, I would call it because that's overt. Don't mind if it's overt. Great. And the United States is not one to call anyone else, on the table for foreign interference, because we've had AID, who for decades was funding everything from political parties to social movements in other countries. So, when you take a look at the list of things that they funded, opposition political parties in India, Ukraine, everything else, if I were one of those countries, I'd be upset with the U.S. too. So U.S. is hard. Thank goodness AID was canceled, but hardly in a position to complain very much. But we do, there's a difference between that type of overt influence and then doing it covertly. And that's where I think you draw the distinction.
Do you think Israel does have some level of covert influence into the U.S.?
Oh, yeah. I think it's I think they have both overt and covert influence within the United States. Israel, look, as far as even espionage cases go, Israel has been pretty aggressive even against the U.S. So even against its allies. The key thing to remember is all nations spy on each other. Okay? Sometimes for good reasons. They want to understand the political direction of a country. They want to understand, what's the inside thought processes, what's the intent. This is how nations protect themselves. So not surprising when you have Israel conducting influence operations within the U.S., within the Israeli diaspora here, through donations and through making donations to companies who then in turn lobby the government. That type of stuff is pretty frequent in America. It's pretty frequent in any open society.
Mm.
I mean, the reason the UK didn't pass up until recently, a couple of years ago, the UK didn't pass a National Security Act, which included, influencing members of parliament, was because the Russian oligarchs were paying so much to members of parliament. So it was pretty, they're pretty resistant for to put into law something that made that illegal. And we see cases there of China giving £600,000, about right, to 800,000, I guess, dollars, to members of parliament to approve trade deals with China. Christine Lee, case blew up a lot. And she actually started parliamentary groups which had dozens of members of parliament in it to advance what she said was the interest of ethnic Chinese in the UK. What it actually turned out to be was to advance the interests of China in the UK. So it's a free-for-all. It's absolutely pervasive. But again, there's a difference in doing it covertly and overtly.
Yes, yes, and that's one thing I say is people. I think these bloggers and stuff who go, they just need to be very open about if you are getting paid, you need to be open about this. Otherwise, I consider anyone taking money from a foreign state of influence anyway, whether they're friendly or not, as being compromised.
Right.
As far as operations that we've seen, speculative, and I'm happy for you to absolutely shoot me down on this. Of course, we've spoken a couple of times about the COVID-19 that took the world by storm. Originally pinned up as someone eating a bat somewhere, then it became a lab leak. And then, of course, you get all these, anything from speculation to conspiracy coming into that. What is your take on this? Because, of course, what some will say is China does have an aging population. This virus overwhelmingly impacted people of greater age. What is your take on this?
Well, it's interesting you brought that last aspect out, because that's something that I've mentioned a fair number of times. I think it was a lab leak. I think it was, and once the lab leak was done, I think China tried to cover it up as an issue of saving face. They stopped it in society. They stopped people from reporting it, again, as an issue of saving space, or saving face. They prohibited investigations, which is why they reacted so strongly to Australia's suggestion that there should be an international investigation into this. They destroyed all the documents that have anything to do. They prohibited publishing on the issue. And then they turned around and did a massive campaign to blame it on the U.S. military, saying it was the U.S. military who did it. In fact, working at Fort Detrick, Maryland. So, which in the before years, decades ago, used to be biological warfare analysis type of thing. It's since turned to medical analysis. Blaming it on the U.S. and just massively spreading it across the public sphere that it was the U.S. who did it. We demand answers. We want answers on this. I think internally in China, they were stupid. They let some things happen they shouldn't have happened. They should have cut down the free movement of people. They should have stopped people from leaving the country. That's how it got out. It got to Italy first, and then the rest of Europe and the U.S. So they didn't handle it well. And then internally, when it started spreading, hey, you're right. It did affect mostly the older population. Guess what? 90% of the casualties are age 65 or above. Okay, the older population. China, its vaccine, Sinovac, was 52% effective. So even for those remote villages that you go to, and they give 52% 52% effective vaccination, all the retirees who are living off government subsidies are dying. Now, that was, I hate to put it, there's no way of proving it unless archives ever get opened up. But you know what? That happened to work out very well for China economically, because they don't have to support a lot of the population that died as a result of COVID, which was no longer production in society, but living off the benefits of society, of their work for the previous 40 years. So it's of course unfortunate, the loss of life, but as far as China's long-term economic interests or midterm economic interests, it did wind up quite well for them. They've saved a considerable amount, not having to pay for the retirement of that population. And as you know, China's reducing in numbers in a way that we hadn't predicted 10 years ago. So less population is going to be supporting more as people head into their golden years. So they just removed one of the problems. I don't know if it was by design or it just happened, but it did happen.
Yeah, I guess that's the golden nugget, isn't it? Is it by design, or is it a outcome of this?
Right.
Now, I have an interest in China. I want to go to see China myself to get an idea of just the state, the history, the people. I've been to many different places, from Ukraine to Afghanistan and everywhere in between. If someone like me, I have a military background, I'm a large social presence online. Personally, I know that I'm impossible to ever buy out for a foreign state. But would there be chances of someone like myself being tailed, being approached, being any of that by someone working in foreign intelligence if I went to a state like this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance. You don't know. Look, you're going to rack and stack compared with every other potential asset that China wants to put on the books, right? So, yeah, and it depends where you go. You go to some province which is unclear. You go to some place that doesn't have a very large presence. Will they know you're there? Yes. Will they care? Will they have the ability to go after you to try and recruit you to set up the type of things it takes to do? Well, who knows? I mean, it just depends where you rack and stack in that. And, you can see there are a lot of influencers, for example, that get recruited from by China to sing China's praise online. People tend to trust foreigners in China as being more honest about things. So you get tons of foreign, people who are either influencers or portrayed as influencers. And we've even seen some cases of using AI to imitate influencers. One person who was an influencer, I forgot her name, but I saw her online, and you can actually search and you'll see this. She was an influencer on the Ukraine, in the Ukraine and reporting on the Ukraine. And someone had contacted her and said, "Hey, I didn't know that you were doing 1, 2, 3." And she said, and spoke Chinese. And what are you talking about? And she said she looked up on, herself online, and China literally used AI to have her speaking on issues of pro-Russia, relative to the Ukraine, and speaking on issues of, supporting China's policy positions. She describes this online. Totally stunning that China would do this, and more they do that sort of thing. So difficult to say. I mean, how much will be on their radar. I'm sure the visa process, they'll figure it out. And if you're threatening, you won't get a visa.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've seen a lot of people, say ex-military, so, similar situation as I, if they go to Russia, that they're basically tailed the whole time and into other areas. But you don't think it would be as obvious as that?
Well, at its high point, Russia had something like, I don't know, one security person for every, one person watching society for every 13,000 or something like that. China actually has quite less number of people watching internally than we saw with Russia or East Germany, but they had the technology that makes up for it. So your picture is going to be there, and they're just going to watch you and record your voice, so that, I'm sure they get it offline anyway, so that they can positively fingerprint you and ID you. They'll download everything from your phone, just as a matter of course, because that's what they do with foreigners, and all that will go into the data streams in Chinese intelligence and the Ministry of Public Security.
Yeah. So how much information, like say I went to China, I go for a week, I see the country, I come back. In that period of time, with all the surveillance, all the technology, how much information would they actually be able to withdraw on myself, even if I don't speak to a single person?
Well, I mean, you figure all your purchases, they're going to know about. All your whereabouts, where you go, they're going to know about. If you're worthy enough, you'll be in a hotel room that's monitored, that has surveillance built into the hotel room. So basically, you think about it, every aspect of where you are, what you're doing, okay, what you're buying is going to be known.
Mm.
And the only question is, that's just as a matter of course. It's a system that is actually able to track over 1 billion people, right, through cell phones. So, they're going to know all that, all the information you put on the visa, any of the quick searches, AI searches that pulls information about you into one pile, right? So they're going to know when you add all that together, your history, your background. If you ever have a CV online, what your schools have been and your entire background, what your political positions are, right? If you're worthy of it, they'll like, okay, well, let's go check this guy out, take it to another level and watch his actual programming and see what it's like. And then they'll know from the time you set foot in country, literally every step you make. They'll track you by your cell phone. They'll track you by facial recognition. They'll track you by the gant in your walk. They'll track you by your walk. How that actually is used as a tracking capability.
Yeah,
so everything you buy. So what, how much is there more to know?
Mm. Yeah, and that internal apparatus, this is something, of course, which is very interesting. It's just the amount. I've seen some online YouTubers who have done some videos in China, and just the amount of cameras everywhere, the amount of surveillance, all this, just everything is watched at all points. And someone who sits in the intelligence sphere, how much greater is that surveillance in China and tracking of individuals than it is in a state like America?
Well, it's obviously, it's the most advanced and sophisticated in the world. I call China a digital authoritarian state because that's what they are. And actually, this goes back to literally the 1940s. A guy, I forgot his last name Wiener, did a book on cybernetics and did a book on integrating cyber and integrating machines with humanity. Right, and it was an issue that Mao always was concerned about, was the potential of uprising internally, not so much the potential for foreigners in China, but the potential of uprising, within China. So Xie Sheng, the China's figure for creating rockets, right? The guy who gave birth to China's space program, went back to China in the 50s from the United States. He writes, he had written, read this book, and he writes about it and saying there's a possibility of integrating in the future our machines with human society as a whole. Mao takes us on immediately. That whole idea is taught at cadre schools. And it's why we have things like neighborhood committees in China, right? That they would have. We used to call it the grandma patrols, right? The old people who would watch everything that's happening around and then report that up to the CCP, report that to the local CCP office, which would make it up ultimately to the provincial office, right? So it was done by hand because nobody had the technology to do it. But now there is the technology to do it. And I mean, this was taught as a construct in leading parties, cadre schools for decades. This is what we aim to do, to correct people's behavior, when it's out of line, when it's not consistent with the party, and to learn from the people what they're thinking on different issues, right? Those are the stated objectives of this. So China, thanks to the United States, sets up this massive surveillance system internally. And the reason I say thanks to the United States is once we went in the war on terror, we went, okay, we need surveillance cameras. They got to be able to do this. This is what we're thinking. These are the parameters. Here's a few $1 billion. Go build this. China did. And, U.S. Cisco and all these other companies took it to China because it was the cheapest option for that type of building development, because we had a war on terror for 20 years globally. So we built those types of surveillance systems, and China, of course, took them and said, yeah, they're great. We'll use them internally. And they used them internally against their own populace. So now, and of course, this is not full spread. I mean, starting in 2006, this came to being, fusing all that information into the National Ministry of Public Security, right? The National Police. So, but now depending on what city you're in, because they haven't implemented the whole thing worldwide, or, nationwide. Xinjiang has been a case test, Tibet before that, and Xinjiang. But now every 10 blocks in China is broken up into that type of square for purposes of surveillance. So if a truck comes and starts putting stuff out on the street that they're not supposed to offload, now within like 3 minutes, a cop will show up and say, you're not supposed to be doing that. The guy says, well, I didn't do that. I was actually doing this. And he shows him on his cell phone, on his camera. No, this is exactly what you were doing. You're fine. If you cross a street illegally, your face appears on the other side of the street on a screen that says, so-and-so, you crossed jaywalk, you crossed illegally, you're being fined X amount, and it's taken out of your bank account, right? Pervasive, integrated nature of that. So that's what China, and again, it's very city by city, but that's what China is evolving to. That type of what I would define as a digital authoritarian state, life in a fishbowl.
And does that concern you that we're heading in that same direction? We're just years behind?
It's a fight. I don't know how it is in Australia, but California, for example, has banned police from using some types of just blatantly using the recognition technology, like driving along, looking at license plates, looking for people that haven't paid bills, online. But yeah, of course, it's pretty pervasive, that type of control and technology. So yeah, and the United States is probably, I don't know where Australia is with that, but the United States is probably better than most about about not having that.
Yeah, we are significantly worse. From my experience spending, months in the US, we are significantly further down the line with everything from digital IDs to surveillance cameras, even surveillance cameras at lights, at traffic lights to be on your phone, through to automated systems in police cars, through to the whole bunch. Right. Of course, there's a good side to this. There's a side of, well, if you're getting a fight down on the main street where I live, and there'll be footage of it, and the person will be arrested. But there's also a more insidious side that, of course, you can get and control, George Orwell type 1984 style authoritarianism. And just to wrap up, what do you think, if you were to give someone I'd refer to it as a soldier's five, but you're speaking to a policymaker, what do you believe is the most misunderstood parts about China, their policy, and their intelligence agencies, and how that is operating?
Well, I think I would say, look, China's got a series of behaviors, right, that we call unrestricted warfare. And you can see it alive everywhere from the South Pacific, all the way through the US. And you can see them doing it, right? We could see even drug warfare. I mean, we just got done negotiating, removing tariffs on China for it acting against fentanyl, against precursor chemicals for fentanyl. So all these years, China knowingly allowing fentanyl to come to the United States and selling precursor chemicals and not doing anything about it because, as they said, the U.S. had to change its attitude, knowingly leading to the destruction of hundreds of thousands at this point, millions of people at the hands of fentanyl, and using it as a policy leverage. It's just one means drug warfare, just one part of unrestricted warfare. Even things like counterfeits, right? 8% of China's GDP is for the counterfeits that they sell legally. Over 1 million people die every year from counterfeit drugs coming out of China. So, there's a lot of things that they use to attack societies. Australia, United States democracies tend to build friendships, right? We have a long-standing friendship. We work together. We tend to build friendships. China gets the same results through coercion. And the mechanisms they use in the coercion are the things that are the elements of unrestricted warfare. So they're not friends. They've never said they talk about building friendships. We've seen what they've done. We've seen them sparking protests, funding, protests. We've seen them in counterfeiting, right? Sending counterfeits. 87% of the counterfeits in the U.S. come from China, which is an effect on our economy. We see them doing drug warfare. We see them doing propaganda warfare. But the fact is that they know they're doing this. I mean, in some of these cases, they have it in doctrine, legal warfare or lawfare, as it's called. I mean, they publicly have it in doctrine in some of these cases. So it's, you need to build a society and a strategic plan that is able to counter that type of aggression.
And do you think that we'll be successful ultimately in being able to counter this?
Nope, I don't. I think the only hope is that that their society, their way of doing business, and let's be fair, it's not all of China who feels this way. It's driven by the CCP. So our only hope is that loses. I mean, I'm sure the CCP is going to be around, but it loses its aggressive approach and says, you know what, we might do better trying to fit in with the world than trying to conquer it.
Nicholas, mate, thank you very much for spending your Thursday morning with me discussing this. Thank you for the fantastic information. I'm sure everyone listening along, including myself, has learned a whole bunch on this. Again, the link to your book will be below. Thank you for talking about that. Is there anything you feel like that we have left out or that you'd like to say before we stop recording?
Actually, just a couple of quick comments. Number one, and I say we, I mean, free world needs a strategy on how they're going to deal with China. China's going to rise, and let's not even think of terms of crushing that, but let's think of guiding it so that it actually follows world order, right? That which was established by liberal democracies, post World War II. Let's get it into doing that. We need a strategy. We need to work as allies. As much as we pound each other and things like that, we're not going to do this individually. I mean, we need to work as allies in doing this. And I guess lastly is people need to educate themselves. If they're interested at all, they need to educate themselves, on where China is, on the China threat, on Chinese espionage. I've written a book on the subject recently. So people need to kind of make themselves a bit smarter. Watching this broadcast is a great start. But it's incumbent upon citizens to do this because your government can't do it alone. I mean, you see the numbers. Everyone's overwhelmed.
Mate, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. And thank you for spending this hour and a half with us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I actually enjoyed it. So I appreciate the time.
Mate, if there's anything that pops up ever, please feel free to reach out to me, or if there is an incident that you see occur that may not be on my radar, so say you see something in Washington or in Canberra or whatever, anytime, always welcome to come on, explain the situation, explain how you see it. That's an open door invite.
Thank you very much. And for you and your viewers, if you have questions, they can go through you and feel free to send them.
Perfect. Thank you very much, mate.
All right. Bye-bye.